Down there, in that green rice-growing valley, is one of the most crucial international boundary lines in the world. On the near side of that meandering river, where we are now, is the British Crown colony of Hong Kong. On the other side, over there, the tip of communist China.
Have you ever wondered what life might be like in an ancient farming village right next to the Chinese border, less than 30 miles from the city of Canton? Well, we'll find out in just a minute as Discovery goes to Hong Kong for a look at the new territories.
Discovery 67, the award-winning program for young people with Bill Owen and Virginia Gibson.
Hi, welcome to Discovery. We're standing on a Chinese junk in the harbor of one of the most unusual and in some ways one of the most important cities in the world, Hong Kong.
This is the Hong Kong of picture books and movie locations. A crowded city broken in two, connected by ferry boats that make their way back and forth over 500 times a day. Over there is Hong Kong Island, just 29 square miles of lush green mountains, their peaks covered in mist and cloud.
And on the other side, Kowloon Peninsula, the other half of Hong Kong. It's ringed with 9 great hills, which gave the place its name. Kowloon means 9 dragons, and it comes from the ancient Chinese belief that there's a dragon inside every mountain. 9 mountains, 9 dragons.
Hong Kong itself means fragrant waters, although many of the waters here are far from fragrant, as we found out last week. There are many other contrasts as well in this unusual city that's become a gateway between East and West. This is a crowded city, where entire families frequently live in a single room, and where much of the living is done right out in the noisy, narrow streets.
But it's also a city of luxury, Ginny, where Chinese business chiefs live in mansions on hilltops, and where expensive apartment buildings rise from the mountainsides. And it's also a commercial city with skyscrapered streets that resemble New York's Wall Street or Park Avenue.
It's a city where women seem to do a great deal of the work, and there are 2 costumes which are almost uniforms among Chinese women. Office workers and shop girls wear a traditional Chinese dress called a cheongsam. Made of silk or cotton, it's the trademark of the younger women. The other style of dress you see so often in Hong Kong is a kind of pajama suit. Silk if the owner can afford it, and cotton if she cannot. You see it everywhere here on laboring women. Women selling newspapers, women selling food, and women working on road gangs. You also see it on the women who provide the power for the shallow little boats which dot the waters of the city. Hong Kong Harbor is full of boats of every description, from huge ocean-going freighters to the ancient and traditional Chinese junks, which serve as fishing vessels, cargo carriers, and just as often, a place to live.
These smaller boats are called sampans. They're flat-bottomed and ride high on the surface of the water, which allows them to go almost anywhere in the harbor. They, too, act as home for thousands of families who live in the storm coves called typhoon shelters along the coasts of Hong Kong Island and Kowloon Peninsula. The people who live here are called the water people, and many of them are born and die here in this shelter without ever having lived on dry land.
Life is just as congested in the streets of Hong Kong Island. Lined with stores, shops, and restaurants, these streets are crowded with humanity from one end to the other 24 hours a day. Some people actually live in the streets, in what the government calls bed spaces.
Just a few miles away are villages made of packing crates and tar paper shacks. These are temporary places, somewhere between actually living out on the streets and finding a more permanent shelter in an overcrowded room in Kowloon or on the island.
A large number of these people are refugees, many of them from China, part of a huge migration of over 2 million who have come into Hong Kong over the past 20 years. New housing is going up all over town, but it never seems to be enough.
One of the best places to see much of Hong Kong all at once is from up there, the top of the Victoria Peak tram. Those little tram cars climb 1,809 feet above the city at the steepest rate of climb of any inclined railway in the world. From up there, the blue water glistens and the skyscrapers shine, and the liners and junks and ferries look like bathtub toys.
You know, it'd be easy to fool yourself into thinking that you were seeing all there is to Hong Kong from up there, or from down here. An exciting and swollen city, Chinese with a British accent.
But there's more. Out beyond those 9 dragons, out beyond Kowloon, out beyond the neon signs and crowded streets.
This is the other world of Hong Kong, a world of rice paddies, water buffalo, ancient villages, and endless open fields that trail off into mainland China.
We're standing now high on a hillside in a part of Hong Kong called the New Territories. Down there is one of the most important international boundaries in the world, the border between communist China and the British colony of Hong Kong. And it isn't an absolutely fixed boundary at all, because here it's a meandering river whose banks move back and forth across the plain in response to floods and typhoons. But it separates 2 worlds. That house below me is in the New Territories. That house in the field across the way is in Red China. Yet in many respects, the lives of the people who live in both houses are very much the same.
There are villages on both sides of the river, villages 1,000 years old. What is the life like in them? What would it be like to live in an ancient town where all the inhabitants belong to the same family? But we'll be going down into one of those villages to find out in just a minute.
About halfway down this narrow passageway is the home of Manchu Wan in the village of San Tin in New Territories, Hong Kong. San Tin has about 3,500 inhabitants, and all of the men have the same family name because they're all descendants of the same man, Man Sai Kwo, who founded San Tin more than 700 years ago.
Well, actually, Bill, Man Sai Kwo only founded a small place, one of 7, which eventually became San Tin, because his sons, grandsons, and great-grandsons needed more and more space. But this is all the same family. Bill, if you were to ask a man his name, he'd say Manchu Sek, Man Chao Yi, or Man Ching Tao, because in Chinese, the father's name, which we call the last name, always comes first.
The men and women who were born and raised here don't marry each other, since, after all, they are cousins, nephews, and aunts. Manchu Wan's mother and wife both came from the nearby wall town of Kam Tin, where the villagers are all part of the Tang family. Man Chao Wan and his father before him, Man Chao Fu, did what the men of San Tin have always done. They left the village and returned with a bride.
And the women also go out in order to marry, but they stay out. The ones who remain here in the village are those who are unmarried.
You know, Ginny, there's a way to tell whether a woman was born here or elsewhere and whether or not she's married just by looking at her. All the women wear large sun hats, and they tie them to their heads with colored drawstrings. Now, a red drawstring means a married woman, therefore a woman from the outside world. A green drawstring means a single woman, therefore a native of San Tin.
And you can only see these hats in this one rural area of China in the New Territories. They can be traced back to a mysterious Chinese tribe called the Hakka, a name which means the guest people or the strangers. Nowadays, the women wear these hats in the field as a protection against the rays of the sun. The hats are fringed in a sort of ribbon curtain, which provides a breeze as they move and work.
Legend says that the Hakkas themselves lived in Shantung, China as early as the 3rd century BC. They've always lived somewhat apart from the Chinese community. For example, you never see the Hakka people or their influences, even these hats, in Kowloon or Hong Kong, but only up here on both sides of the Chinese border. The way of life in San Tin is very much what it was 700 years ago. Rice is the main crop now, just as it has been all through recorded time. There are rice fields alongside the village today, just as there were at the very beginning. Rice is the core of life in Southeast Asia and the Far East. There's a great deal of rain in this part of the world, and rice is a grain which grows only in wet fields.
The people who live in the village need very little from the outside world. Their main food crop is rice, but it isn't their only food. They also like pork. The future bill of fare is walking through the streets right now. They also like chicken, And that part of the menu is frequently underfoot, too.
The basic work animal of any Asian rice village is not a cow or a horse, but something which looks quite strange to you and me. This is a water buffalo, a kindly, hard-working animal who's considered the family pet by farm families like Manchu Wans. He's a sturdy animal with a low center of gravity and a thick, waterproof hide. All in all, just perfect for soggy weather on muddy ground. Few people here ever buy a water buffalo. They just wait, and nature provides.
The villagers do need a few things from the outside world. One of them is raw rattan, a reed-like plant, which they use in their rattan furniture factory. The raw rattan is imported from Burma. The rattan furniture factory is a key to a change which is taking place in rice villages like Santine. Today, it is one of the few small factories still working in the village. Another is a small handbag factory, intended to supply markets overseas with inexpensive straw handbags. Another is a statuary factory, where clay figures are made for export all over the world.
But here, the change begins to show. This empty building used to be a shoe factory where rubber sandals were made for village use. It doesn't operate now. There used to be a brick factory, too. It was housed in this building. Now the building is deserted. What is the change that's occurring in rice villages in this part of the world? One answer is to be found in the deserted industries. But there's another answer. When you come into a village like Santine, you're aware of a great many women at work. At first, perhaps, it doesn't seem unusual. Asian women always work alongside their men, and sometimes field labor seems to be reserved for the women. And they raise the vegetables, which augment the diet of rice, fish, and meat.
But during the quiet hours, when the families are all together, you still get the feeling that there are many more women than men in these villages, and that a lot of the women are unmarried. And it's all true. But where are the men?
Some of the village men have taken jobs in industry in special towns in the new territories. Towns like this one, Chun Wan, newly created to be a factory town and nothing else. Some of the men who work here have come from 15 or 20 miles away. Others have traveled much, much farther from their ancient homes.
Of the 3,500 people in Santine, about 500 of the young village men are now away from home. Many have gone to England to work in the kitchens of Chinese restaurants, where they can make a larger salary and send it home in the form of money orders, such as the one this village mother is cashing from her son. They feel they can make more money in a shorter period of time and then come back home and live fairly comfortable lives. But what is the move to factory towns and to Great Britain's kitchens doing to the ancient villages of the new territories? This is a way of life which has endured for 7 centuries. Now there seems some question whether it will endure for another 20 years. A lot of the farm fields around Santine have been abandoned. More and more, the villages are left to the children and the women, the chickens and the dogs and the pigs. Over every door in the village, there is a likeness of the Chinese god of the doorway, Mun Sun. Just now in Santine and villages like it, he is presiding over what are probably some rather lonely doorways. There are children in this village who have forgotten what it was like to have a father. Others, the smaller ones, have never really known.
The days may be numbered for the ancient way of life of Santine and places like it. There may be no place in the future scheme of things for tiny villages with little public markets.
Here, for hundreds of years, villagers have been buying the things they like and the things they need. Fish and seafood, bean curd, soya sauce, and a wide assortment of fruits and vegetables. This is a place where the people of Santine buy from and sell to their neighbors. They've grown and cured most of the produce with their own hands.
This little market of Santine is a symbol of the ancient Chinese village way of life. With so many of the men going to foreign countries and to industrial towns, what happens to the life of a family who want to stay right here? We'll take a closer look at the members of Manchu Wan's family and their future in just a minute. In the two-room house of Manchu Wan, 3 generations of his family live together. His aging parents, Manchu Wan himself, who is 36, his wife, Tang Kam Kwan, 33, and their 5 children. A daughter, Man San Ho, who is 8, the eldest boy, Man Tang Yao, who is 6, and the next 2 boys, Man Tang Fat, who is 4, and Man Tang Wan, who is 3. Littlest of all is a 1-year-old girl, Man San Kit. They are all descendants of the one man, Man Sai Kwo, who founded the village of Santin more than 7 centuries ago. They have a feeling of affection and responsibility for the town. And somewhere in the past, perhaps more than once, both of the men of the household must have decided against going away. Decided instead to stay right here and make a life, no matter how difficult and how slender the rewards. They chose to make a life they could share with their wives and their children every day as the families were growing up.
The family of Manchu Wan and their relatives have been rice farmers for hundreds of years, and in 7 centuries, their methods of rice cultivation haven't changed at all. The rice paddies of the new territories produce a very fine quality of rice. So good, in fact, that in the old days, successive emperors of China would eat no other rice than that grown in the new territories. First, the fields are flooded. Then they are churned into the proper consistency by a wooden plow drawn by the family's water buffalo. The plow and the water buffalo are the tractor and cultivator used by the new territories farmer today, just as they were 200 years before Columbus discovered America.
Dotted over the landscape are bright lime green patches in the midst of larger fields of a darker green. Those dazzlingly green areas are where the rice shoots are growing. The rice kernels are simply thrown into the water where they quickly sprout. And when they're 3 or 4 inches high, the back-breaking labor begins. These little green sprouts are called Qing Mu, which means little greens. They must be pulled from the water, then separated like this, and then replanted one by one in the nearby paddies. All of this work is done by hand. Nothing has changed about this method of rice cultivation since ancient times. There are 2 rice crops every year in the new territories. It takes about 90 days to bring a rice crop to maturity. In between times, the rice paddies must be allowed to rest and be replenished. Otherwise, they will rapidly become exhausted and useless.
One of the best methods of keeping the paddies alive and productive is crop rotation. For a wet farmer like Manchu Wan, about the best rotation crop is 1 or more of the vegetables for which the Chinese are famous. For example, ginger, water spinach, bean sprouts. In between the rice fields, in the drier places, he raises cucumbers, onions, or these tiny eggplants.
Other members of Manchu Wan's family are fish farmers, which means that they cultivate carp and sunfish just as their relatives grow water chestnuts and bean sprouts. The water is shallow, and they catch fish by using nets, or sometimes with their bare hands.
Manchu Wan believes in the future of Chinese village life, and he means to be a part of it. Many times in the past, he might have given up and gone to work for wages, but he will not work in a plastics factory, nor will he serve in one of the kitchens of London or Liverpool. His life and his world are right here, where his ancestors stopped in their migration and built a town that was safe from the bandits who had terrorized the area before they arrived. Manchu Wan believes there's a life here for his descendants, just as there was for his ancestors.
In a sense, Manchu Wan believes his ancestors are still here in Santin. These are the ancestor scrolls of the village. They're the history books of the community and the family biography of Manchu Wan and everyone who went before him. It is the wish of Manchu Wan that when a scroll is placed here for him after his death, that it will tell the story of a man who found life and reward in the village plan set down by an ancestor 7 centuries in the past. We'll be back in just a minute. We hope you've enjoyed the first part of Discovery's visit to Hong Kong. And if you'd like to find out more about this city or more about Chinese family life, then ask your librarian for these books. Fei Gao, A Boy of Hong Kong by G. Warren Schlote, Jr., and this book, Chi Ming and the Tiger Kitten by Josephine Marquand and Pearl Binder. Or ask your librarian for any other books she might have on Hong Kong. It's an exciting city.
Next week, we'll be just a few miles over in that direction,
where we'll see what life is like for the water people of Hong Kong, the thousands of families who spend their days and their nights on the tiny sampans that crowd the harbors along the coast. We'll meet Chow Ping Kwong, his mother, brothers, and sisters, and we'll take a first-hand look at how 7 people eat, sleep, play, and hope on a 14-foot boat that's the only home they've ever known.
We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Discovery Production Unit's foreign transportation arrangements provided by Alitalia Airlines. This has been a Jules Power production in association with ABC News and Public Affairs.